Olá, seja bem-vindo! É muito bom ver você por aqui. Nosso evento já vai começar, mas antes gostaria de dar algumas dicas de segurança. É proibido fumar. Respeite a capacidade máxima do local. Antes de começar o evento, por favor, localize os dispositivos de segurança. Em caso de emergência, mantenha calma, identifique as saídas de emergência e siga as orientações da nossa brigada. Opa! Nosso evento já vai começar. Muito obrigada pela sua presença. Ops! Por favor, não se esqueça de colocar o celular no modo silencioso. Pronto, agora sim! Até a próxima!
Conheça a Casa Firjan. Cursos, exposições, tendência, tecnologia e inovação para a nova economia. Viva a transformação.
Bom dia, senhoras e senhores. Sejam bem-vindos.
Morning, ladies and gentlemen. Welcome to the second day of the convention. Some information I'll repeat from yesterday because probably there's someone new here. So we say that this event is being transmitted at the Firjan channel at YouTube. Just like yesterday, we'll have simultaneous translation that will happen in Portuguese and in English. Me, Dolores, from the Brazilian Platform of Sustainability, and my colleague Ruby Lambert from the UNFSS will be our hosts today in this convention. On behalf of the Federation of Industries of the State of Rio, Firjan, the Forum of the United States on Sustainability Standards, UNFSS, and the National Institute of Metrology, Quality and Technology in Metro, through the international coordination, CAINTE, we start this second day of the International Convention on Sustainability, Trade and Standards. I would like to share with you our pleasure of seeing that yesterday many people gave feedback that they were understanding better the complexity of the subject and the challenges we face. We got pretty happy with that. And we also would like to remind you that tomorrow, both in the morning and in the afternoon, we'll have two workshops. Both workshops will be to deepen the discussions that we started yesterday and will follow today. And unfortunately, not everybody will be able to be part of these workshops. We had to reduce the number of people because we want to have a more focused discussion. So just to remind you that tomorrow we'll have the workshops, and those who are confirmed received an email on that. One more information. Yesterday, I said that we count on graphic facilitators here to build the story of this event and the dialogues that are happening here. And I invite you to take a look at the drawings during the intervals, the coffee breaks. And if you were not here yesterday, try to understand what happened through the drawings. So now I'll pass on the floor to my colleague Ruby, who will introduce our first panel. Welcome you all. Bom dia, senhoras e senhores.
Of the International Convention on Sustainable Trade and Standards. Before we go into this first session for today, we would like to play the video that we couldn't play yesterday for the launch of the a global initiative for trade development and the Environment Research Hub. Thanks. So that was what we were supposed to play yesterday for the launch of the Trade Development and Environment Research Hub. If you have any questions, please direct them to our UN Environment Representative, Matthew Scuto, if you can just wave your hands. Okay, so today what we were going to do is we will commence with a presentation that was developed in collaboration between the UN Conference on Trade and Development, UNCTAD, and the Andean Community Secretariat. This study was published to promote the sustainable value chains and how VSS can be an effective tool to export its novel foods internationally. With that, I have the honor now to invite Huasca Ahata, Deputy Director of the Andean Community, to say a few words. With that, Rodrigo Ruperez will be presenting the study. Do you want to?
Estou de volta aqui só para perguntar uma coisa para vocês. A gente teve um pedido do colega da comunidade andina para falar em espanhol.
Us to speak Spanish because he feels more comfortable this way. So the Portuguese speakers won't have simultaneous translation, but as in general, Portuguese speakers can understand the Spanish, I would like to ask you if it's okay with you for the Brazilian people that we have no translation, because the translation will be into English. Is that okay with you? Okay. Bem, eu quero pedir desculpa, eu prefiro
the presentation in Spanish. Thank you. En primer lugar, quiero felicitar al Foro de las Naciones Unidas
Forums on Sustainability Standards and Metro for the excellent organization of the second International Convention on Sustainable Trade and Standards. I would like to thank UNCTAD for the invitation of the Andean community to share our experience on voluntary standards. And now I will present the study on sustainable trade between the Andean community and the European Union. And my presentation, I will talk about the background and some general information on the study. This study was created by the General Secretary of the Andean Community and UNCTAD, that is within the United Nations Forum on Sustainability Standards. This study carries out on the implications of the European Union legislation on export for the Andean community from the point of view of sustainability in agriculture and trade, and to foment the renewable energy sources. The purpose of the report is to promote the Andean export to third-party markets in the Andean community with the support of UNCTAD. So we created this study to identify the volunteer studies, and this way promote the export of the products of the Andean food to the countries of the European Union. And the study has 5 components. The first one, we have a description, a deep description on trade between the Andean community and the European Union, with emphasis on the trade of agriculture products. Second, we describe the characteristics of the European market, in particular regarding the sustainable exports. Third, we detail the demands of the European normatives for Andean exports. Fourth, we explain the voluntary standards on sustainability and its role in the production and export of agro-food. So the study brings tools for the use of the exporters. Fifth, in the studies, we analyze the value chains and how the directive on renewable energies of the UE affect the commercial policies incorporating criteria according to the commercial agreements. These criteria not only affect the way how producers seed or fertilize or transport or distribute the products, but also how it affects the consumers in the ways they consume or they package or label it and so on. And finally, this study is not only theoretical, it demands to be a practical manual for the use of the exporters. So, as part of the execution of the project, we developed 4 points on sustainable trade and investigating the opportunities for the European Union. The points started in June 2018 in Peru and in December 2018 in Colombia, in Bogotá, and May this year in the cities of La Paz and Santa Cruz in Bolivia. And in next November, we'll have a discussion on exporters in Quito, Ecuador, with on the existence of this. And the objective of this discussion is to train exporters in the voluntary normative applicable to agro-food products. In those 4 discussions, we trained more than 100 exporters and public workers and technicians in the export unions that deal with this subject. The initial version of the study was presented in 4 workshops, and we acknowledge the comments and the practical experience of the exporters that became more enriched by the studies that we presented. The workshops, I would like to say that they were organized with the support of UNCTAD in Santiago, with the Forum of the United States on Sustainability and the Center for International Trade and the Center for the Promotion of Imports in the countries. And I would like to thank these institutions for the support for those workshops.
So the trade between the Andean community and the European Union is the second market of exportation, most important for the countries of the Andean community. And each year they export around $14 million. The importations of the European Union and the commodities and the products, they are around $6 million, representing 43% of the Andean bloc trade. Even so, there's an increasing popularity in the European consuming of foods like maca, moringa, sachainchi, and quinoa that reflects the importance to enjoy all the sustainable exportations for the European Union. For the importance of those Indian countries, they began with a negotiation 5 years after 2012, and they signed that agreement of those Indian countries and the UE, and that began to work with Colombia on 2013. They began to implement it on Ecuador in 2017, and Bolivia is still working to adhere to this agreement. As you can see in this chart here, on these recent years, that has been a decrease on the exportations of the Andean countries. It is important to highlight the weight of the exportation of those agro-foods from the Andean communities to the UE, and we can see that the exportations have been growing with certification to the European Union, although still we have many challenges to overcome so that all the agricultural products from the Andeans can go to a successful way to the European markets. the Andean products that have an export potential to the EU. So this study is going to focus in natural foods and processed foods, mainly in exportation of fruits and vegetables, because they are one of the main sectors in this trade between Andean community and the EU, because they have a great potential of growing not only in volume but also in income, and also because of the integration of the renewable energies and the entire process and in the sustainable certifications. Using this tool of the ITC, the potential map, we have identified to each of the 4 countries of the Andean community all the products that are exported to the EU, but the ones that have a potential of a better use in that growth of the exportation. Between these products that have the greatest potential of export, we can see aguacate, bananas, fresh grapes, guayavo, arándanos, coffee, cocoa, almonds, and quinoa. And now, el señor Rodrigo Ruperes is going to present a more detailed content of this study. Thank you so much.
Obrigado, Oscar.
Muito obrigado pela
Thank you for attention in the first presentation of the morning. I hope that the next 15 minutes I can bring something to you. Eu gostaria de focar a minha experiência.
My experience working together with Andean producers, some of them exporters of agri-food and novel food products, trying to adapt their exports to the European Union regulations and by searching the best voluntary sustainability standards for their products that would allow them to conquer this precious market as it is the European one. Well, we can see in this slide that Andean producers often have problems with BSS because they do not meet credible standards, compliance is costly, small producers risk being left out, and because of an excess of non-harmonized norms. But I think this is not new for you. These are the typical problems that has to face every single producer from a developing country. As a reference of certification, we can say, for instance, on fair trade certification in the Andean community countries, Colombia is the country with the highest number of fair trade certified plantations in the world, mostly banana. Peru is the country with the highest number of fair trade certified organizations in the world, and Ecuador is the country with the highest growing fair trade exporters. But these figures may can lead us to error because we are still very far from a correct and reasonable use of the standards. Prosperity, dignity, and a better planet for all. These are some words that we could listen yesterday. However, to achieve this prosperity, we need to change the way we do things. As Mr. Fernandez de Córdoba said yesterday, for a start, we need to change the way we consume, the way we produce, and the way we trade. That's the key, where standards play an important role for sustainable and inclusive development in the Andean community. The total value of the European trade in fresh and agro-food is gradually increasing year on year. Opportunities exist in the European Union thanks to consumption trends among which healthy, natural, and organic products enjoy increasing popularity. European consumers are looking for a tasty product that has been produced in a way that is respectful of people, society, and the environment. The importance of certification favors the flow of information throughout the entire supply chain, which tend towards the specialization and integration of its members. It's a fact that in major and lucrative markets with double-digit growth rates, such as those in developed countries, the European, sales of certified products have surpassed conventional product categories. For instance, the organic products are particularly linked to the idea of good health and better taste, and European consumers, as I have already said, really value it and are willing, what's more important, they are willing to pay a higher price for it. So it is not a niche market anymore. It's just a part of the market. Another fact is that in the European Union there were 12 million hectares organically cultivated in 2016, more than 2 million in Spain, 1.8 million in Italy, 1.5 in France, and organic food consumption is developing exceptionally well in relatively rich countries from Europe, especially in Germany and France. So this is demand for the Andean products, for organic products, that often exceeds supply, making it easier to find buyers and better margins. Some actors of the sector have also shown their concern for small organic producers in developing countries who could not meet the requirements set by different socioeconomic and geographical conditions. This is a part that when we have been with the producers, with small producers and small exporters, they are afraid of this situation. Apart from this, I don't want to forget to mention some of the wonderful tools that ITC, Joseph, I didn't know you were going to come here, but the wonderful tools that ITC makes available to exporters, which are not only very useful, practical, and easy to use, but also free of charge for everyone. We are lucky to be able to use them in the training given in our workshops. This is the standards map, the sustainability map, the trade map, and they are not the only ones. There are still more, like the export potential that Waskar have just shown. I invite all of you to get to know them and to use them because they are really practical and efficient. Well, now something about trends. Trends, we speak about trends in the European market to the producers so that they have an idea of how things are going on in the final market. We are living a total transforming of the global food ecosystem. The European market demands certification, high quality standards to ensure quality, food safety, and the guarantee that the environmental or social aspects of its productions are correct. If I have to choose three trends, I would say transparency. Transparency means that the clean and clear label is the new global standard. The demand for total transparency now incorporates the entire supply chain. The consumer demands to know the journey lived by the product from its origin, and at the end of the day, this is what we call product traceability. Second trend, I've already mentioned, organic foods such as herbal milks, meat alternatives, and vegan offerings have quickly become the new hottest trend. Consumers are looking for innovative options to integrate the benefits of these products into their daily lives. And finally, sweetener. Sweetener, sugar, and may my colleague Miguel from Bonsucro forgive me. I don't know if he's... Miguel, I'm sorry, but sugar is under suspicion. In Europe, there are public campaigns preventing from abuse of sugar consumption. At the same time, it's the product that everyone loves. So it is the key. It is still the key ingredient that delivers the sweetness and great taste that consumers are looking for. This is love and hate relationship at the same time. Regarding the European regulation, we have been analyzing the the legislation, and in an effort to promote global sustainable development, the European Union is taking steps to integrate environmental concerns into its external relation and trade policies. It places a particular emphasis on developing stronger global cooperation on environmental issues as promoted by the United Nations with the SDGs. They seek a better balance between liberalized trade rules and multilateral environmental agreements. Well, the European market is highly regulated. So we have an exporter. It's necessary for him to keep up to date with the European standards and regulations because they are very strict. And there's a tool called the Trade Help Desk. It's the one-stop shop for access to the European market. You can find all the legislation there in this Trade Help Desk. It provides information about trade agreements, about basic rules, procedures, statistics, import duties, regulations, requirement to be met for marketing on the European market, food safety, limited use of pesticides, marketing standards, labeling and packaging, well, and finally also social and environmental compliance. Regarding corporate social responsibility, this has become a necessary but not sufficient requirement for success, as product quality remains the top priority for European buyers. There is a renewable energy directive that requires that at least 20% of its total energy needs comes from renewable sources for 2020. But in last year, the House of Representatives supported raising the renewable generation quota to 35% by 2030. And well, this is going to be included probably in the directive. So we can see how the European market is focused on this clean, sustainable world, and how should we focus our sales to this market. Well, this is an Andean dish in a European restaurant, timbal de quinoa, mango, and palta. It's the way that we call avocado in Peru. And I want to talk about two concrete products, because sustainability standards has become the market reality for competitiveness and supply chain management. And who benefits from voluntary sustainability standards? Let me answer this question with the example of the avocado. Imports of fresh avocado to the European market have tripled from 2012 to 2018. This upward trend is driven by the consumer demand for ready-to-eat and healthy food. It creates opportunities for producers and exporters, where Peru and Colombia are among the main producers and exporters. Who doesn't love fresh avocados in the salads? No? I love it, and it's a trend in food in Europe. But from my research, an European consumer can find not only in the same city, but also in the same area, a standard Peruvian avocado for 3.5 euros per kilo in a small neighborhood store or a supermarket, and a labeled Eco Peruvian avocado for 45 euros per kilo at an eco-friendly store just around the corner. That is a price difference of 12 times more. First of all, I would like to focus on traceability. The product itself, its labeling, its market image must offer enough confidence to the consumer so that they can trust and have the certainty that they are consuming something truly eco or organic as it intends to be. This is not always achieved without some help, and this help comes from some VSS, which helps to solve this problem. Secondly, supposing traceability is correct, I can assure you that the Peruvian producer of this eco avocado is not increasing his income in more than twice. Meanwhile, the final price in the European stores has been multiplied per 12. This simple example takes us to an important problem. The producer has to transform their production process to adapt to the BSS. This requires great effort and dedication, apart from big amounts of money, to multiply the value of its product. As we have seen in UNCTAD's Andean Community Project, the cost, the hardest part of this process, falls mostly on the producer, while he's going to receive the smallest share of this significant increase in product margins. Imports and retailers will keep for them most of the cake, but I'm not telling you this just to complain, but to find a solution for this situation so that we can really use these standards to clarify and to better contribute to dynamic growth of developing countries' exports. A better deal for the small and medium farmers in the Andean community. However, there are some positive stories from standards. In general, the producer will improve the production process through utilization of the standards. These ones help the Andean to integrate themselves with European Union importers and distributors. Value chains are strictly organized under the direction of these importers, wholesalers, or service provider in adherence to the retailer's demands. If you are not certified, I would say that it's almost impossible to be a part of this value chain who goes to the European market. So this is it reflects the important trend towards vertical integration. Then, through BSS, we should address needs of producers, need to address social, economic, environmental, and traceability issues. They also need to be practical and realistic, as well as reflects producers' capacity. But we have producers, we have importers, and who else? Who else benefits from voluntary sustainability standards? Well, I have another example there on quinoa, but as we are a little bit late, I think we are going on. We are saying, who else benefits from these standards? Well, the society as a whole, not only the producer region, BSS can really help to develop a sustainable way of production. Let me make a brief reference to my stimulating experience setting up renewable energy facilities applied to agriculture, which allow to comply with the requirements of some standards. Because agricultural production standards and renewable energy are intricately related. The use of unconventional renewable energy sources, such as wind, solar, or biomass, can provide farmers with a source of income and increase the commercial attractiveness of the product to be commercialized in Europe. Renewable energy can also help reduce pollution and global warming. This takes us to the fulfillment of goal number 7, that says, ensure access to affordable, reliable, sustainable, and modern energy for all. These systems used to be quite expensive, but they are not anymore expensive. For instance, cost of PV photovoltaic system cells for solar panels have reduced its cost more than 70% in the last 10 years. And they are really easy to settle and almost with no maintenance. So it can open new areas for irrigation and for development. The use of renewable energy included in some BSS help to reduce greenhouse gas emissions, provides individual energy independence, and increases the possibility of exploiting farmland in isolated areas, improve public health, and saves money through the reduction of the energy cost for producers. And, well, just the final question, we wonder what can governments, our governments, can do to ensure that the benefits from standards are equitably shared, including small holders and small producers. Some ideas, not pretending to be exhaustive. We think promoting and supporting training programs. In our meetings with the Andean exporters, we would check there is a tremendous lack of information regarding standards, especially for those small companies that very often have no idea of what to do. They know it is hard, they know it is expensive, but at the end of the day, many of them had not even selected which standards they would like to comply. They say it's expensive, it's difficult, but I don't even know what's the standard that I would like to have. Training programs will help to remove prejudice, to be well informed, to invest in correct certifications, and doing it in those that are truly worthy. Supporting international institutions and NGOs for this training process. It's also a government challenge to increase the participation, active inclusion, because BSS can also exclude producers, as we said before, something we have to avoid. Public sector can contribute with BSS to address barriers they face, such as cultural issues and languages. They can support also through regulations or public procurement, as someone said yesterday. Reducing cost of audits through pooling of resources, and providing information to farmers and promoting market transparency. Well, this is more or less what I wanted to say, and thank you very much, UNCTAD, for continuing to count on us. Thank you very much, Inmetro, for sending us your generous and kind invitation. And thank you very much, Casa Frillan, for offering us your hospitality and for allowing us to enjoy this blessed land of yours. Muito obrigado.
Thank you again, Rodrigo and Huasca. It was a very interesting presentation. Actually, we already received 2 questions from the audience, but I understand we have to go to the next round. But afterwards, if we have some time, we can address the questions. Otherwise, who sent that questions, you can approach Rodrigo and Huasca. But again, such case studies for the Andean community, and especially the tools that was shared, also can be looked upon as best practices and knowledge sharing that could potentially be adopted to other nations. So that said, I would really encourage you to visit the Standards Map portal, which was developed by ITC. And coincidentally, the head of this brilliant portal is here with us today, whom I shall now welcome on stage, the moderator of the next panel, which is the Standards and Certification Systems, Contributions to Sustainable Value Chains, Joseph Wozniak from the International Trade Center, ITC. Along with the panel speakers, Mariana Barbosa from Rainforest Alliance, please come up on stage. Elise Correa from Proterra Foundation, and Carlos Brito Suarez from Fruity Acai. Thank you.
Thanks. Thanks very much, Ruby, for the introduction, and good morning, everyone. Before we kick off in terms of the actual panel, I'd like to just briefly introduce my distinguished colleagues here on the stage. To my right is Alice Correa. She is a civil engineer with a major in sanitation. She has an MSc in environmental sanitation from the University of Ghent in Belgium and a PhD in the area of environmental management from the University of Sao Paulo here in Brazil. She has more than 25 years of experience in environmental health and safety and social topics related to audits and working workers' rights. She's also been involved with expert and consultancies with the UNFCCC, the UN Framework for Climate Change Convention, and she also now is collaborating with Proterra Foundation since 2011 with standard design benchmarking work. She is currently also a member of the Proterra Certification and Standard Committee. To my immediate left is Marina Barbosa. She's the country representative from the Rainforest Alliance here in Brazil. She coordinates activities in field markets, quality management, and partnerships with sector players of the standard. She graduated in industrial engineering with a master's degree in global public policy, and she has several years of experience in business and sustainability. And last but not least, to my far left is Carlos Brito, who is currently the sourcing director and board member of Fruti Acai, with more than 30 years of experience in the agriculture industry, including cattle breeding. And he has spent more than 2 decades dedicating his career to the plantation work and whole chain of logistics in rubber, soy, coffee, cotton, and the food industry. Carlos is a former president and executive director of the food industry, where he focused on sustainability aspects in sourcing and supply chain, and he is a former member of the Brazilian Rural Society, the SRB, and the National Export Association for Cotton, ANEA. At Fruti, he is responsible for the buying and the buying process, the sourcing process of the fruit that goes into their drinks. So this is the acai or the acai berry, and the relationship with the producers with whom they source from in the north region of Brazil. So that's the introduction of the panel. Just to go over briefly in terms of what we want to cover this morning is the issue of smallholders and smallholders' access to standards. Now, we've discussed this a bit, actually, the former presentation from our colleagues in the Andean community, Rodrigo and Huasca, they discussed issues related to challenges of smallholders, and this was also mentioned yesterday in one of the panels, and it's been a topic that has come up yesterday as well, and also indeed, it's a key issue in terms of sustainable development and the ability to move forward with the overall standards, let's say the standards objective in terms of improving sustainable development, environmental, social, and indeed the ability for these SMEs to properly participate in sustainable or global value chains. So we're looking at technical issues related to standards compliance, and also financial issues. So how do producers, smallholders, deal with these issues? So what I'd like to do is just to pose that question, but maybe for all three of you, what I'd like to maybe hear first is just a brief introduction to your organization. So whether it's Proterra, Rainforest, or Fruti, just to give the audience obviously they know about Rainforest and Proterra likely, but maybe specific in terms of your activities here in Brazil. And then also provide, if you will, some information on how do you define or characterize a smallholder in Brazil? Because we tend to use that word smallholder, and really a smallholder in Brazil is different than a smallholder in Kenya or a smallholder in Vietnam or a smallholder in whatever country. And so let's try to be specific to the context here in Brazil in terms of what is a typical smallholder that you deal with, in terms of size, in terms of capacity. That's the first question. Second is then what types of programs or actions do you engage with the smallholders to improve their access or not here in Brazil? And give maybe some examples of successes or challenges that you're facing. And so that would be the question that I would pose to both Proterra and to Rainforest. And then last but not least, Carlos, maybe from your perspective, from a company, from actually sourcing from Brazilian farmers, what types of capacity building or support do you provide? I mean, is there, when you identify new sources of supply, how do you really cultivate them, engage them to get them to your level, not only from a sustainability perspective, but also from a quality perspective? Because I think that's also a key point, is quality as well, in terms of meeting buyer demands, not only here in Brazil, but obviously on markets such as the European Union markets. So that's maybe my first question. We'll start off with Alice, then we'll go to Marina, and then last but not least, Carlos, and then I'll come back with maybe a subsequent question.
Bom, muito obrigada. Eu queria inicialmente, então, agradecer o convite que foi feito à Fundação Proterra para participar aqui hoje desse evento. Nós ficamos muito...
Today, we are very happy with the invitation and the possibility of being here. Proterra Foundation is a non-profitable organization. We are the holders of a voluntary standard on sustainability, that is the Proterra standard. And Proterra standard works with the whole chain to supply food and also animal food, so we can work with any agricultural product anywhere in the world. It's not a standard only for Brazil or any specific region. And in our daily life, we have dealt with different agriculture cultures in different places of the world. And this point of the small farmers, the small holders, is a big challenge that we face. And in this context, before going specifically to the point that John mentioned, I would like to say that we try to understand in this context the voluntary standards not only as a barrier, but also as a bridge that will link to completely different realities. You have a big multinational corporation on one side producing in different countries and different products consumed by all of us anywhere in the world. And on the other side, you have a smallholder working with his family in a small piece of land in the countryside of Ukraine or Rio Grande do Sul or India. And how do you get two different words so close? There will be differences between the smallholders due to their locations and specificities in their countries, and among them and these big corporations, and there is a big word, a big gap. So the standard works as a bridge, as a link, in the sense that this is the communication, this is the link, the foundation for this relation. So we see that this way, and then we can open some possibilities of dialogue that otherwise we wouldn't have. And many times the standard has some technical requirements, and it will be the first contact of the smallholder to what we call the good practices. And if we understand that about 40% of all employment in the world is linked to agriculture, we understand the power of a standard reaching a smallholder in terms of changing how things are done and change lives of this family and this small community. So much more than opening the market, the standard changes people's lives. And not acknowledging that is losing opportunities of using the standard as a factor of transformation. I'm trying to bring a practical example here for my life in Rio Grande do Sul with a rural producer, a small producer, having the backpack to use the pesticides kept in his kitchen. So whenever he finished his day of work, he took it to his home with the kids and the family. So with the sophisticated requirements of an adequate storage of agricultural products, obviously you have all these problems of making it a reality to the family, and you cannot hope that the small holder would understand the requirements and all the sophisticated words of a standard. But anyway, you need to go back there and showing with pride that he has an area outside his home where he keeps all the pesticides and raw materials that he used and that he's now concerned that he cannot leave it there where the children play. So this is changing the mindset of the person. And you see the power of that. And this is what Proterra is trying to do. I can tell later on a little bit more on the project in India, where you have soy producers that are working with the properties of less than 1 hectare of land. So they produce. So for them to produce a little bit reasonable amount of soy lecithin, you need a lot of families producing. So this is a big challenge on how you reach this information, this knowledge, and how you translate the technical requirements into something that makes sense to these people. But at this point, what I would like to say is that I would like to mention the power and the use of the VSSs as a tool to train and to disseminate information and bring in knowledge to the end of the change generally is excluded because this changes everything. And we believe in the foundation that with that, we'll build a new pathway to reach the SDGs. I mean, with this work in the field. And in terms of Brazil, the small lands, the smallholders have different definitions in different parts of the country. Brazil is a big country, but the foundation will basically work with the area, 40, 20 hectares, that for some holders is something absurd, and for some others it's a small property. But how is it organized? It's guided by the family. Is it a family work? There is no company, no professional administration. So this is a factor that to the foundation is a characterization of the smallholder. In India, for example, we considered everything less than 2 hectares as a small holder. Just to mention that, and then we can go back to this discussion. Muito obrigada, Alice.
In terms of the standards being a bridge and providing, if you will, kind of a pathway or a roadmap to implement these types of practices is quite well put. And I think we tend to, in this whole discussion, we tend to kind of always link standards or VSS with certification, right? That like they have to go together. And I think looking forward, if we're trying to increase the uptake and the scale of smallholders that are trying to understand these types of sustainable agricultural practices, one thing we need to think about perhaps is that we just can't be driven that we have to certify every single smallholder, because maybe really it's the whole system is not built for that, given the types of organizations and small farms that you have described. I mean, it's just not a realistic proposition, and many of these smallholders are not even ready to export in general, because we can't forget that besides the voluntary type standards in the trade world, we also have the mandatory regulations, the SPS and TBT type standards that are also de facto. These are legal requirements, right? So when we talk about this whole smallholder issue, I think one of the issues we should really start to contemplate is how do we create a context for improving the overall capacity of the landscape, and then moving maybe down the road later to a more of a official certified state. So that's just one point to think about for the discussion. Next, just wanted to turn to Mariana and maybe get your views from the Rainforest Alliance perspective on this.
Bom dia.
I think Alice's introduction was wonderful. Thank you, Alice. And Rainforest Alliance is also NGO, and we are in more than 60 countries, and we make the intersection between forest business and agriculture. Our mission is to change responsible business into something normal. In Brazil, basically, our work focuses on the certification programs, and the biggest program that we have is coffee, and we also work with cocoa and oranges, and also some fruit. Recently, we gathered with woods that had another code, and today we work with both the old ones from Alliance and Woods, and we are building a new one for a new certification that will unify from the moment we start training the producers for certification from 2021 on. And all this process was interesting because it made us reevaluate how certification is done. It is quite a complex process. We need the global standards, but we also have the realities of each country and the smallholders and how to deal with all the conflicts that we have and also make sense and add something. And also to think about our work, how we want to do that, and so on and on. So this point of the small producers is something that we always discuss because in fact, it's not common for a smallholder to comply with the requirements of the code, but it happens. But generally, they can't do that alone. It depends on the sector and the country. In Brazil, for example, the coffee sector is quite well organized. We have lots of smallholders working in cooperatives, so it's easier to certify those smallholders with a special code that is a code for group certification. And the cooperative is like a management center for the certification of them. And we can divide the costs of audit between different farms and make it easier for them to have the micromanagement centered in a group. But not always the producers are in a cooperative. In cocoa, for example, it's more difficult and they have less capacity than the coffee ones. So during this moment, we count on the partnerships of the companies. For example, there are companies with agreements to have a minimum of certified purchases since up to 2020, and we work internationally to make them aware of the certification and comply with that. So this company looks at the chain and they need to buy certification, but the producers cannot certify, so they start investing and organizing the producing and supporting the implementation of certification, and so that they can reach this commitment. It has been working a lot. Another thing that is a big challenge for the smallholders is legislation, because in our code, they have to comply at least with the national legislation. And the national legislation is very good, but very difficult to be implemented in practice. NR31, for example, has so many requirements for the rural workers that the smallholder cannot comply. We know that when we go to the field. And it's not the problem of the certification that it's not accessible. It's the legislation that cannot be implemented as a public policy. So government has its role, but as we also mentioned, the company has their role, have their roles, and we try to work along with them. Rainforest doesn't believe that only one part of the chain will solve everything. So on our side, what we think is trying to make the legislation easier, because it's quite complicated, to understand with all the standards and all the laws and working on the environment, how it's applied for the universe of those producers. So we thought of checklists or translating the general legislation context into what to do in real life. We've been discussing on that a lot. Another thing is that certification has a premium for the smallholder, and it somehow is diluted in the chain. It's not transparent of how much of the premium got to the producer. And we want to avoid that, and we've been thinking on how to ensure they have the clear notion how much they win to have a certified product, and this is for them their investment situations so that they can comply with the code. The code doesn't happen from night to day. It is a progressive thing. So sometimes it's easier, sometimes it's more difficult, and the margin is about 7 years. And with this premium, when they are certified, they need to invest for the requirements of the next audit. So it's important to make everything clear on how much they invest and how much they receive. And lastly, as I mentioned, This discussion on the companies is necessary, and with government, we are exploring some initiatives to work with initiatives and with technical bodies so that they are trained, and when they are in the field, they can also understand better what the certification requires and give some guidance to the smallholder. Government may also give credit lines or foment and support cooperatives because, as I mentioned, it makes everything easier for the smallholder to be certified in group. And another interesting thing, as you mentioned, that they are not ready to export, is that today we see certification as something that is a seal we need to reach the European market. But we are also trying to bring solutions for the domestic market so that Brazil has a smallholder certified. And it would be quite positive for smallholders because they would have the national market to sell. They sell to Brazil, but they would have extra value in their product, selling to the national market. Regarding size, I agree with Alice. We work on the definition that less than 4 modules or 10 employees, and it varies from Amazon to the south, so it's not easy to define. But it's this kind of perception on how the farm is managed and the amount of employees, and that's it. If you have any doubt, you may ask. Thank you. Muito obrigada.
Insightful, and you covered a lot of very detailed points, a lot to kind of think about. I'll pass the word now to Carlos for your intervention.
Ok, bom dia a todos. Obrigado pelo convite de estar aqui. Nosso desafio realmente na FRUT está sendo bastante interessante.
Is very interesting and very intense, because we work in the north part of the country. We work from Odajás in Amazonas in the first semester to supply the factory in Manacapuru. And in the second semester, we work in the state of Pará, in the city of Mocajuba. We installed a factory there, and it's quite modern. And the challenge is that we have 97% of the acai production with extractivism. And how could we do differently and have traceability or give the certainty of traceability to our product? So from 2015 on, we started working intensively in the diagnosis of the suppliers in the productive chain of acai. We had a partnership with a traceability company that is quite well known at national level, and we started with a questionnaire with 20 questions, and then we agreed that it was not enough, so we now have 93 questions in the questionnaire, and today we have 800 people enrolled, and we know the families, the schools of the kids, and the income of the family, and what they do with their garbage, and what they understand about labor security and quality of fruits, and the moment of collection and management and improvement of their income, and what they would understand in terms of relation with the company.
Since a model, a centennial model from an intermediate 1, 2, or 3, and finally they have people from the mill. So we wanted to have a local presence to understand all the process. So we made it, we didn't stop doing this kind of work. From the first year, we were 70, and then we got to 100, and then we are growing a lot. I think right now we are going to be over 1,000 of people living near the rivers. We want to know everything about them. So we created a social environmental policy for our company, and we wanted to spread to them, to share with them, where we had a policy of buying fruits. These are the rules that Fruity implemented, and we brought this knowledge to them and the guidelines so that they can understand everything. This partnership that we are always trying to have this bond with that community. We want to change the way of life, the way they live for so many years. We are trying to do something. This is a seed that Fruity is planting to try to improve this partnership from both sides. We want to improve the quality of our product. We want to have better logistics. We want to have better transparency, the way we work, the way we pay them. So this is a work that we do every day. On a daily basis. We have a sustainability department inside Fruity that's connected to my sourcing area that is the whole time dedicated to that. And with that, we've been meeting a demand of our president to give back to Earth what Earth gives to us. And on the other hand, we are able to bring this community to be our great partner. We got the certification for life last year. We just renewed this certification. It was a great leap on the amount of registered people from the community. And so we are breaking a system that was there, and we believe that this is possible. And we are able to create cooperatives. We created 4 cooperatives last year. We guided them on regarding organizations, and we distributed over 1,300 IPIs. They demanded it from us. That's not what we thought it would be nice for them. So what did they want? They wanted boots, helmets, glasses, small things that we were able to share with them that they asked us. This is not something we wanted to give them. They asked that for us. So we didn't have drinkable water, so we were able to give them over 150 filters of water, and we were able to give them materials to harvest acai. So every day is a learning day. We learn with them and we teach them something. So this is a constant work. They're not few because we need a lot of them from the community. We go from people who have only 2 acres, 3 acres, maybe 70 acres, and they don't have their entire property with acai. And then we try to create a plan for them. We don't want to be a monoculture. We want them to have other kind of incomes, other options too. So we do this work the whole time. It's a daily work. This is what Fruity has been trying to do. We've been planting this seed. We are working full time. Always on the second semester on Pará, on the first semester on the Amazon. So this is a great challenge. Thank you so much for letting me share this work.
Thanks very much, Carlos.
Muito obrigado, Carlos. Obrigado, Carlos. Eu só queria...
This checklist of about 90 questions, and then you also mentioned later that you were certified. So, are your farmers that you source from, are they certified to Fair for Life or another standard, or is it your internal code that Fruity has developed for the agricultural and social types of sustainability programs you're putting in place?
Não, é certificado for life. Certificado for life, feito pela certificadora EcoCert.
The EcoCert certificator. since the communities, all the preservation, all the social, environmental, the respecting the forest code, we really are certificated. All the social part. Obrigado. E eu entendi que então muitos desses custos
cost of, for example, the protective gear and the work in the water treatment or the water provision for the farmers. So that's quite a implication in the sense that can you maintain that going forward in terms of when you start to increase the number of farmers that you source from? Is that something that you can budget and from a cost perspective pass down to the consumer and make it a kind of a profitable
undertaking? Como eu coloquei, é uma semente, é uma transição, é o que nós estamos, que eu falei, um aprendizado nosso e deles. Então, nós estamos nesse primeiro momento, nós estamos doando, nós estamos mostrando. O ideal é que num futuro não muito distante, eles consigam, através de organização, de cooperativas, de associação, estarem se organizando também, trabalharmos conjunto dentro do processo. Enquanto não dá, é um custo que a Frutti, não é um custo, é um investimento que a Frutti vai estar colocando ao longo do seu tempo. Né?
We are trying to multiply that inside each one of them. Muito obrigado, e eu acho que
really resonates, and I think also from the perspective of looking at, and this will be discussed, I guess, on a later panel, so I don't want to maybe move into the future of certification, but where companies are starting to make these investments as opposed to obviously the smallholders that don't have that they don't have the resources, pure and simple. Before I follow up with one final question, just wanted to make sure that the audience has the chance to use the app and to ask questions, because I'm not seeing any questions on the screen, and from yesterday's panels we had questions already by this time. So if there's any questions, please do type them into your phone, so we can then share them with the panel, because we're moving toward that part now where we can get audience feedback. One of the questions that I wanted to follow up with, which was mentioned also in terms of Mariana's discussion and intervention, was the role of government, and this also came up yesterday. So obviously the smallholders don't have the resources to improve their own, if you will, farming conditions, nor is it really feasible in many cases for them to access finance. Even microfinance, I think, is something probably beyond the realm of reality in many cases. So governments play a key role, and if we're looking to have these producers come up to a certain level, up to the legal requirements in many cases, such as the Rainforest UTZ standard establishes, how do we then find the governmental resources for this? And so certain countries, we heard yesterday, for example, India, they subsidize certain producers in certain sectors, which then creates, if you will, an unfair, maybe one could say unfair competition with another country producer like Brazil, because then the Indians have a cheaper cost. But then there's a reverse case, for example, in the coffee sector. I know, for example, in Costa Rica, the Costa Rican labor laws are quite advanced in terms of minimum wages for farmers, which obviously increases the production cost of fincas that produce coffee in Costa Rica, putting Costa Rican coffee farmers at a disadvantage to their neighboring countries that are also coffee exporters. So how do we, just to all three of you, this is an open question, how do we kind of deal with government intervention in terms of supporting farmers, but by not, keeping the playing field level? Or is that's just a cost that we have to deal with, and maybe that's a way to incentivize other governments to move up and provide support to their domestic farmer groups? Just a question, maybe we'll start with Alice.
Bom, é uma pergunta difícil, né? Na verdade,
this is a tough question, because I think these are things that walk in parallel. Because what the government does, the contribution that the government gives, is something that we cannot control. We can try to influence, but on a daily basis, we are not counting on that. So we have to work for ourselves. We have to make it happen. We have to make it work for ourselves. So in the case of our foundation, where we are beginning this project that we want to train the smallholders from India. So this is something really hard. We are really trying to find a partner. We need human resources. We need funding. So this is a great search, and we are really looking forward to finding that. But beyond that, funding, support, and financial support, there are other issues that we can try to figure out. And this is the first year that this is happening at the foundation. We need to understand, have different interpretations of that standard for that smallholder in India, in Brazil. So we are going to take that reality into account. It is not good. It doesn't make any good if I go to that small producer in India and I tell him everything that he has to work with according to a specific NVS. So I need to transform that into something that makes sense to that local reality. What is the climate change? What it has to do with what you're doing? How can you contribute? And we need to acknowledge and recognize that these are stages. So if you look at Pro Terra standard, it's complying or not. So when we work with a smallholder, now we are escalating that. We are creating stages. So the first year we have a minimum. We have another language. We have another approach. On the second and third year, this is going to be different. And we want to reach in 5-7 years. This is a process. But at the same time, the communication of this with all the shareholders is very interesting. This is a process. Maybe they will have some kind of certificate of participation at the process. He's not as qualified as a huge producer that has many resources. We are creating this clear communication with the market. We want to have a quality product, but we know that this is a process. The great buyers have to understand and acknowledge that this is a process to value the smallholders' effort. In our case, with the small producers, we cannot count on the government. And in my opinion, in Brazil, you will try to talk to the government and you will get nothing. And these communities, they are a clear example. They are not on the Ministry of Environment, on the Social Ministry, Agricultural Ministry. He's just not right there. What we intend, what I suggest to our government, maybe is a partnership, a public-private partnership. Açaí is a new product. It's a decade old. This is a fantastic food, it's spectacular food, and its consumption is going to grow. So let's increase this production. Let's remove all the red tape. We have Pronaf here in Brazil. But when I go to Pronaf, they ask me, where are your documents? Where are the documents from your property? 90% of these people from those communities, they don't have that documentation. So if they have some kind of registry like ours, where you have a partnership with a company that is going to guarantee that future procurement, like açaí or any kind of other fruit from the Amazon, this would be really interesting. So we want the end of red tapes through banks, public-owned, state-owned companies, maybe companies that could collaborate on that process through some kind of technical assistance that could be supported by companies. For sure, we would have an increase on productivity and a great raise on that, on those incomes. I would like to add something else. Sometimes we take a look at the government, because government is something so abstract. We want to work with the opportunities from local governments. We know that Minas Gerais is the greatest producer of coffee. If it was a country, would be the greatest producer of coffee in the world. So this is a goal state, is a key state. This is a hot spot. We need to establish partnerships, and we would receive governments from other states or other places that want to help our producers to certify. How can we do that? And we are trying to create a methodology, because sometimes it works and sometimes it doesn't. We had a partnership with the Minas Gerais government, but we had a few limitations. So we want to try these new approaches. And another place where this dialogue works is the multi-platform sectors. The cocoa sector is one where we can establish a dialogue. Now we have the platform Cocoa Action that has NGOs, has producers, has governments. So how can we, at that round table, what is missing on the sustainability of that sector and what the sector needs to do to move on? So we start to understand from the perspective of other players, what are the restrictions? And sometimes we can help and sometimes we can't. But to have this general alignment as a sector is really important. Muito bem. E então eu
ask for some help because my machine is breaking. It's sorry, just it's fading out. So, okay, thanks a lot. So, just to kind of wrap up the panel, would appreciate maybe if we can address some of these questions from the audience. And so maybe the first. The first, let's say, three are addressed to all three of you, but maybe this first, let's say the first one on Rainforest Alliance and the differences with Proterra. This came up again yesterday as one of the challenges in Axel's presentation, also in terms of the multiplicity of standards and the overlaps and things like that. And that also has a particular relevance to smallholders because not to minimize the differences between the standards, but I mean, if we're dealing with fundamental concepts of environmental sustainability and labor and social type criteria, how different can we be? I mean, it goes also back to the panel yesterday with FSC and PFC. So maybe one question, how different are they, and mutual recognition, is that possible? And that's the first. And then maybe the second is this issue of the local consumers here in Brazil. What is their appetite for maybe paying more for a sustainable product, and how can that maybe drive, let's say, increased uptake of sustainable goods and also producers that are implementing sustainable practices?
Bom, então com relação à pergunta, qual a diferença do padrão da
question on the difference between Rainforest Alliance and Proterra, I don't think there's any difference. At the Proterra Foundation, we are really embracing our mutual recognizing. So we are open to talk, to see how we can work together, to see how one standard can recognize the other. We think this is key. We have many different standards. They have many things in common, sometimes not, because one is focused in one sector. Sometimes the other one has a lot of details for only one agricultural culture. But sometimes you can see metric data that's so specific for one culture, and you can't take it to the other culture. So it's really hard, but we embrace that a lot. We believe that this is a way. This should be the way to mutual recognizing each other, see how we can work together, understanding the differences, understanding if they are relevant or if we can let them go. So we understand that this is fundamental.
Regarding the Brazilian market, I'm not that optimistic. I think the Brazilian market's not prepared and is not willing to pay more for certified products. Is there a niche? Yes, there is. There is a bubble of that. But if we think about the Brazilian market as a whole, no. It's not prepared for that. And in the case of the foundation, for example, our certifications, 100% of times aims to export to Europe. especially because we work not with a non-genetically modified, and we have big market on that in Europe. Obrigado.
About the recognition is what Alice said, and I'm not sure if we work with the same crops. Eu tô falando em inglês, desculpa.
Não, aqui na
É difícil fazer virar a chavinha.
We work with any crop, but for example, do you work with a coffee, roasted coffee? No, we've never worked with that, but we could. We have space for that. So, for example, our merge was a lot in the sense of simplifying. We saw that the codes were very similar with a lot of similar questions and 30% of overlap of producers. So we decided to merge so that we would have value to the producers. But this is a big change. So systems work differently, sometimes in terms of auditing and so on, and we would need to understand it a little bit better. Regarding the domestic market, I disagree a little bit because today, without doing anything, we've never invested 1 cent on Brazil, and there are many companies that are adopting certification. For example, if you look on the market, there are a lot of lines of Três Coração brand with the seal. Orfeu Coffee has a seal from wood. So if you go to a medium-class supermarket, you would see on the aisles a lot of certificated coffees without us doing anything for that to happen in the domestic market. So we understood that this is a spontaneous trend by the companies because there is a lot of competition. In the coffee market, for example, there is a constant search for differentiation. So if we have a sustainability seal, it's a way of saying that your coffee is different from your competitors. So we also see a trend in the growth of organic consumption. It grew a lot. It's a niche, I agree. It's expensive, but Rainforest Alliance doesn't want to be as expensive as organic products. We are not organics. We understand that we want to be best friendly and cheap because if it's too expensive, nobody pays for that. So we see opportunities in Brazil. In the beginning, it was not easy. We need to communicate sustainability to the companies and the consumers and create this culture, but we see that in the long term it's possible. And in the short term, we should work with the niche. So for example, in coffee, work with the companies that are open and willing to do that, or start with special coffees that traditionally is a market that is linked to sustainability, and make sustainability reach people's homes and people understand what is behind that and increase the demand. Muito obrigado, Mariana. Eu agora passo ao Carlos, porque tem perguntas.
What is the modus operandi of handling a situation when a group that Fruity invests in to certify to join some other company or other competitors? I mean, do you allow them to sell to other juice producers or other companies in the market? How does that work?
Não, completamente.
It's completely free. We want to be partners of them. They are not obliged to sell us. Obviously, we search for partnerships. We have a different treatment. And again, as I mentioned before, the local presence is important. So the local Fruity presence, we hope that brings us close and that they give us preference. So what we understand is that they have to consult us. Prices are dynamics, purchase is dynamic, so we are able to innovate all the time as we do. Muito obrigado. E só uma última...
On the residues?
Ok, o destino dos caroços. Eu vi uma preocupação com o caroço. Como eu coloquei, o açaí é muito novo, quando você olha 15 anos.
If you think about 15 years, 10 years, in terms of intensity, in terms of new factories and new processes, I generally say that the açaí seed would be just like sugarcane waste in the 70s in their production. We have few studies, few research. Unfortunately, today, what we do with the seeds of acai is that we have a local partner in a huge area that is quite well treated and impermeable. When the seeds is there, when they are dry, they go to composting, that is a good organic matter, or go to a company providing to a big cement industry in the state of Pará to be burned. But it's full of fibers. It may treat it as a food. We can make flour with the seeds of acai or use it in the civil construction, for example. We have lots of studies to be carried out, and we hope that we could have some university focused on that, hoping to help us and join us in this help. We have a lot of work ahead of us in the case of seeds. Muito obrigado, Carlos.
I'm mindful of time and that we're running up against the coffee break, so maybe I'll just respond to that question to me. So in terms of the sustainability map, we now have, as mentioned, about 255, 56 standards, codes of conduct on the system. We are a neutral entity and a neutral tool. And what I mean by that is we don't rank or value judge the different standards on the system. Our team in ITC, we actually work specifically one-on-one with each standard organization or the company that manages the code of conduct in that case. Our team references the standard, so the standard organization gives us their code in a PDF or Word document or Excel, whatever. We then enter it into our database, which has over 1,200 criteria that covers both sides of the standard. So think of it as two sides to one coin, the criteria, so environmental, social, economic, ethics, traceability criteria. And then on the other side, the standards processes, so how the standard is governed, who develops the standard, who accredits the certification or audit bodies, what type of help or assistance does the standard provide its users, how often is the standard updated, is it a business-to-business or business-to-consumer for product label facing standard. All these types of information is provided in the processes section. Then once our team is finished with the referencing at the office in Geneva at ITC, then we actually have a third party, an expert in that sector, whether it's forestry or whether it's aquaculture or whether it's farming, whatever the case may be. We review that in a third party way, and then we have a back and forth with the standard organization to get their approval before we upload it to the system. So it's a very rigorous, quality controlled process in terms of how we work with the different standard bodies. I'm happy to answer any questions later at the coffee break or lunch if you have any more specific queries. So given the time, I think we'll end the panel right now, but I want to thank Alice, thank Mariana, thank Carlos for your interventions. Thank you very much as well, the audience, for your questions, and have a great coffee break. Thank you very much.
Hello. Could you, we're going to take a photo. For the rest of the audience, I shall now invite you to have coffee. We're going to have a coffee break just outside. And if I may insist, you do come back in 15 minutes. We're going to start at 11 sharp. Thank you.
Boa tarde. Aliás, vamos continuar as atividades da manhã.
To continue with our morning activities, going on with the event, I would like first to thank the presence of the Swiss Consul, Mr. Rudolf Weiss, who's here. So thank you, Mr. Wolf Reiners. And I would like to introduce the next panel that will deal with the National Multi-Stakeholder Platform on Sustainable Value Chains. We invite to the next panel our moderator, Wolf Heinz from the German Development Institute, and the panelists, Liu Xin from SAC China, Manish Pand from QCI India, Rogério Correia from Imetro Brazil, and Ivone Ndhvu from SABS South Africa. And I pass now on the floor to the moderator, Mr. Wolf. Muito obrigado.
I think you said I hand over to Wolf. So thank you very much for the kind introduction. We are here in the afternoon, not yet afternoon, still morning panel. Excuse me, for discussing a topic on which we touched upon yesterday already during the presentation of the VSS story in Brazil. Rogério talked about the Brazilian experience or perspective, and the platform was one of the elements that was a center stage in that. And also this morning, when we talked about the Andean communities' relation with the European Union, the multi-stakeholder platforms were mentioned already. And now this session gives us the opportunity to delve a little bit deeper into this topic, to discuss in more detail. And I'm very happy to have here with me representatives from existing or crystallizing national platforms. And I start with Liu Xin from the Standardization Administration in China. We have Yvonne Ndhvu from the South African Bureau of Standards, Manish Pandey from the Quality Council of India, and Rogério Correia, as we all know already, from Imetro. For me, it's a pleasure to act here as a moderator. And I'm in my function as the head of the Managing Global Governance program. It's really a privilege being here, since the MGG program is also a partner to this event and partner in the network of institutions which are represented here during the panel for a couple of years. So we are very proud being here a partner, and I don't want to miss the opportunity to thank the organizers for inviting us, having us here, and for the strong partnership, the organization in particular done by Dolores and Rogério, of course in collaboration with UNFSS, Ruby and Santiago, and all the other helping hands. So we are very happy to be part of this initiative. The MGG, Managing Global Governance Network, is a network of institutions from 6 countries, from Brazil, Mexico, South Africa, India, China, and Indonesia. And we are a network of institutions that evolved over the last 12 years. So it developed over time, and it's a network of institutions from different sectors. From academia, so we have research institutions, think tanks, universities, part of the network, from public administration, public sector, and also the private sector is engaged, and of course civil society organizations. So this is the character of the MGG network, and whatever we do, we try to have or generate contributions to the implementation of the 2030 agenda. It is a network which is funded by the German federal government for Economic Cooperation and Development, implemented by the German Development Institute, which is my home institution. And within this network of institutions, voluntary sustainability standards is one important working field for us, a work stream, and we are engaged on this topic now for a couple of years already. And we could contribute and accompany the process of the creation of national platforms over the last years, which we're very happy about. And today, there are representatives of this process here, of the MGG network on the stage, and we're here to share they're here to share the insights and experiences on the platforms in the past or maybe in the future, and also help contextualize, as you said in the program, the existing multilateral frameworks of sustainable trade. And I will move on now to the introduction of the panelists, and I start with Liu Xin. She's been involved in national and sector standard research development related work for more than 10 years now. She's director of the International Organization Division of International Standards Cooperation, the Department of Standards Innovative Management, State Administration for Market Regulation of China, and the Standardization Administration of China. And she's responsible for organizing, coordinating national stakeholders to participate in the international standardization activities and also further develop the national platform in China. Yvonne Lovu is program manager at the South African Bureau of Standards, overseeing the development of South African national standards. And her scope of work covers ICT and management standards, includes sustainability standards in that way. And we are very happy that you are here, Yvonne, because I know in parallel in South Africa, the ISO General Assembly in Cape Town is taking place. We are very happy that you made the effort to come, although these parallel activities are ongoing in which your institution is involved. Dr. Manish Pandey is head of the Project Analysis Documentation Division at the Quality Council of India, New Delhi. He's leading flagship governmental and intergovernmental initiatives, such as the India National Platform on Private Sustainability Standards. And was also involved in the development and international implementation of the Yoga Professional Certification Scheme, which I talked about earlier, I found very interesting, and responsible for the design implementation of various private, voluntary, and international standards. Also expert member to various technical committees, working groups, and schemes that are run by the government of India. Rogerio from Inmetro, Voluntary Sustainability Standards Desk Officer, researcher here at Inmetro during the last 17 years. But I found in the records you're working on issues related to agreements on technical barriers, to trade negotiations, quality management, product certification, and as the desk officer of the Brazilian platform of VSS and advisor to the president of the Brazilian Committee on Technical Barriers to Trade, and as organizer, key person of this event. We are very happy and delighted to have you here. We have the opportunity to discuss with you. You are pioneers in the field. You are pioneers in what you do and what we do internationally. And at the same time, despite everyone is involved in national platforms, the platforms are not the same, right? Platform is a terminology that covers many different initiatives and setups. And one of the objectives of the session is to clarify what platforms actually are and what they do and how they can be of help. Some of the platforms are now established for a longer period of time already. Some are still in the making. And as the first step, I will ask all the panelists to provide a brief introduction to the setup of the platforms, how the work looks like, what the mandate is, what are your tasks and objectives to do. And I will start with this discussion with Manish, because he is representative from the platform that was established first in India, so a pioneer of the pioneers. And then we'll follow with Liu Xin and Rogerio, and hand over afterwards to Yvonne as a representative for a country where the platform is still crystallizing. Manish, the word is yours.
Good morning, all. At the outset, let me thank UNFSS, Metro, and MGG for having QCI here. So as Wolf has just mentioned that we are the first platform. Now talking about my organization, which is the Quality Council of India, it is a perfect case of a PPP, where we have 50% holding with the government and 50% with the industry. This makes us unique. And when we talk about our national platform, we are a multi-stakeholder driven platform, which means we have the government, we have the industry, we have the consumer organizations, we have the institutions, we have small farmer groups, we have small, medium enterprises. So that makes us quite representative in terms of the issues that we deal. We are being, since the UNFSS started this initiative, the Ministry of Commerce gave us, the Quality Council of India, the mandate to establish and then implement various activities under the platform. This platform is demand-driven. I have my colleague, Arudra. Arudra, if you can please identify yourself. So he is my colleague and the coordinator for the platform. So we do a lot of activities. We have done a report on the various private sustainability standards in the country. We have done a lot of activities on national interpretation, which I'll come back. But principally, this is a demand-driven platform which has the focus of tackling issues on private sustainability standards. So as a part of the government, our focus is to not proliferate a lot of standards, but to see if there are issues in the implementation, adoption of certain standards. So we step in, talk to the scheme owners, and then try to provide a solution. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Manish. I hand over to Lisa. You have a microphone.
Yeah. Good morning, everyone. I would like to take this opportunity to share our experience. Chinese national platform was set up 2 years ago with the guide of the Ministry of Commerce and the Standardization Administration of China. China Association for Standardization, as an NGO, undertakes daily work. The purpose of our national platform are to build a bridge between stakeholders to improve public awareness of VSS and to promote VSS in order to achievement UN SDGs. The main tasks of our platform are to contact relevant investment and do some research, to establish a national dialogue platform to exchange information and share experience, to hold workshops and to take capacity building activities to raise awareness of VSS. And with the support of ITC, we set up a database of VSS to provide localized information to Chinese stakeholders. As you know, not all Chinese can read English, especially for the SMEs. And the last way is strengthen the platform's cooperation between China and other countries. That's all. Thank you.
So thank you, Lucian. Thank you, Ruth, for your kind words. My colleagues in panel, Manish Pandey, Yvonne, and good morning, the audience. I will turn to Portuguese. I think it will be easy to speak in my own language. So, bom dia a todos novamente. Enfim, acho que é importante essa oportunidade de falar um pouco mais sobre o trabalho da plataforma e do envolvimento da plataforma do Inmetro em sendo a plataforma brasileira. Esse trabalho tem relação com o trabalho relacionado à ação do Inmetro dentro do Sistema Nacional de Metrologia, Qualidade e Normalização, que é o SINmetro. Ontem, na minha primeira fala, eu tive a oportunidade de falar isso. explicar esse trabalho. Né? São enquanto as normas voluntárias de sustentabilidade estão relacionadas com a questão comercial, de acesso a mercados, que impactam as pequenas e médias empresas e, de certo modo, enfim, né, criam dificuldades para essas pequenas e médias empresas. Né? Então, o Inmetro, como gestor desse sistema de qualidade de infraestrutura no país, ele tem um papel, sim, fundamental relacionado a essa discussão. E a plataforma vem exatamente para isso, né? Para esclarecer as múltiplas partes interessadas, o papel de cada uma delas. O papel da plataforma é gerar conhecimento, de avaliar as NVS, explicar para os produtores os impactos associados a essas NVS, quando eles não as usam e quando as usam, gerar estudos sobre...
Says, and all this discussion around this, we want to do this cooperative work with the other platforms, the other national platforms like UNFSS and partner bodies. We want to develop projects. So a part of this job that's been executed since 2 years ago, when the platform was launched in 2017. So many of you here, I have the opportunity to know you personally because of all these meetings and these events where we showed our work and presented our work and the cooperation studies. We've been working as a team a lot, so it's really important to be here together at this convention and take a look at each other in the eyes and know each other, to understand what each and every one of you in Brazil, with small projects or big projects or studies, and the academic community that you have been developing, because this is so important. Each one of these organizations can be working here in Brazil and internationally, and they can work together. So the platform is in Inmetro, because Inmetro is the responsible one to spread that knowledge, spread that system, to provide the entire base, the quality base of our country. And because Inmetro explains and avoids that technical barriers could be a harm for national companies, in order to make those NVSs achieve their goals for the smallholders and the final consumers, in order to really be a concrete tool to prove that your product has some kind of quality that is going to meet the demands of the certification, and the consumer is going to buy a quality product that meets his needs also. So communication associated with that, the transparency issue, those are values that the platform has to nurture, and this has been the objective, the goal of this work, and also is the goal of this convention too. We want to gather you all around here in this room to discuss this subject that has many different standpoints, many different points of view from all the shareholders, the certificators, the producers impacted, the government, the many actors that play here, the academy. So this is the importance and the message that the platform, the Brazilian platform, national platform, would like to live to all of you. We are really open and trying to provide the best communication about this subject, which is an economical subject. It is an environmental subject. It is a social subject. It's totally aligned with the agenda, the 2030 agenda. And we do need to discuss, because it has to do with our lives and the planet's life. So the platforms have that role to bring you all to this round table, to the discussion of different points of view, and to produce and generate actions that are going to meet all the demands from all the shareholders. Thank you. Obrigado.
First insights from the platforms that are already operating and further developing. And in South Africa, Yvonne, you are considering building on these experiences in view of a South African platform.
Thank you very much for the opportunity and the platform to talk to you about what we are doing in South Africa. As introduced, we are from the South African Bureau of Standards, which is a state-owned entity established by an act of parliament with a mandate to develop national standards and to render conformity assessment, which is your testing and your certification services. So we are one of the agencies of the Ministry of Trade and Industry in South Africa. And the standards that we are mandated to develop are by their nature voluntary. Until such time a regulator make reference to it, then it becomes mandatory. But our role is to develop national standards that are voluntary. We cover 4 areas: food and health, engineering and build, electrotechnical, systems and services areas. And within these 4 sectors, that's where we find across the board sustainability standards. I will give you an example of them as I continue to give you this brief. We do this through 300 technical committees, and we have a suite of over 7,000 standards, of which about 1,600 are regulated. And lots of these standards are also adopted from international organizations like your ISO, IEC, CISPA in the telecoms area. So we also do a lot of harmonization at regional level, SEDEX-10 and at sub-regional, and we also do at regional level, which is ARSO. And yeah, so in terms of where we are, in terms of establishing a VSS platform, we haven't yet done that, but we have engaged enough to know exactly what is happening in this platform. We've been to several meetings where we have been supported to attend these meetings. So at the moment, we are currently engaging with the higher echelons at the SABS to convince them, since we have already gathered the information, to tell them what VSS is all about. Looking especially at the mandate of ITC, which one of them is to assist SMMEs to be able to trade in the international market. And one of the things is as well to aid trade, whether it's SMMEs or big companies. We also have the same objectives as an institution. So with that being said, I believe that we'll have a kind of a relationship to be able to do this, since we have same objectives. In terms of examples of what we have in terms of sustainability, as I've mentioned, we also have sustainability standards at the SABS. We have standards that we are trying to establish now on cannabis. We have on essential oils. We have on mopani worms. We have on African traditional medicines, national addressing. We have on moringa trees. And we're also looking at translation of some other ISO standards, like for instance, the ISO 9001. We have actually translated that into one of our indigenous languages, which is Zulu, because we find out that our SMMEs are not all comfortable in English, so the translation will actually help in in assisting them meeting the requirements in those standards. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Yvonne, and thank you for this opening. So we see there are platforms, existing platform, or in the making, and they share, the institutional setup is different. The mandate is somehow different. The institutional affiliation or the internal setup, the structures, the actors that are involved can vary. On the other hand, you share objectives, you share several tasks that you all complete in relation to transparency, information, provision, guidance also, and you have an internal function and an external function. So I would like to open the next round to get a little bit into deeper really in your work and also in what is the impact of the work of the platform. So I would like to ask you to share with us an example where the existence of the platform or the work of the platform could make a difference for VSS adoption, implementation, or for a stakeholder that otherwise would not have had that engagement of the platform. I will start again with Manish.
Okay, so when I talk about India, I think so there are quite a bit of similarities with Brazil. So one of the major tasks of the platform is to not only accelerate the exports, but also take care of the domestic population. So the first example I would like to give is on Global Gap. So when we talk about standards and schemes, we need to see about their operability in terms of the local context. Now, Global Gap has this wonderful instrument, which we call it as national interpretation, which helps the entire standard to be interpreted in the national conditions, because mostly it is coming from a westernized system in which certain clauses would not be relating to the national context. So one of the activities which the platform had done was to actually see the clauses, or we call it as CPCCs, which were the critical control points, to understand their applicability to the Indian context and change some of those interpretations in a manner which benefits the Indian farmers. So we have a great example of grapes which are being exported to EU, where there were certain conditionalities which were not being fulfilled in the Indian condition, whereas after the national interpretation was done by the platform, we saw that the certification was easy in a sense about the implementation part of it, and we saw that there was an increase in exports. Now coming to the domestic markets, what we have been doing is we have been actually designing a national good agricultural practices system which was called INDGAP, so that at some point of time we could benchmark it with Global Gap, so that the small farmer or the small holding farmers could actually embark in their journey of quality and over a period of say 2 to 3 years be at par with the Global Gap system. So this is one example where I wanted to give you on the agriculture systems when we want to sort of engage the scheme owners in terms of having national interpretations in place, which benefits the country's smallholders, or if you can say the micro and small enterprises. The second thing which we are embarking on is talking about the GI systems, which is the geographical indicators, where if we see that there is a certain particular either a manufactured unit or maybe a particular fruit coming out of a region which is endemic, we are wanting to devise a certification scheme which will help them to sort of establish the credentials, not in terms of its quality, but also its authenticity of coming from a region, which would give them a market access and some kind of a preference in terms of when they either put it in a domestic market or in the exports market. The next thing what we are trying to do is also trying to engage the government to make them understand the usefulness of internalizing or agreeing that quality should be a part of the procurement process, because usually in the government there is a term which we understand in India is L1, which is the lowest cost, but somewhere we want to emphasize that it is also the quality that they have to look into, and in that case if there are voluntary standards which are made through a very strong multi-stakeholder engagement, that they need to take cognizance of that and make it as one of the requirements while they do procurement for the government. We also develop a lot of schemes which would be which would be always demand-driven. So if a ready-mix concrete association comes to us in Quality Council and talks about certain quality issues that they have, Quality Council through the multi-stakeholder process would design a scheme. When we talk about designing a scheme, that scheme is usually designed under an ISO 17067 parameter, which means that once the scheme is launched, it could be replicated in any part of the globe, because it would always engage a third-party certification and assessment system, which gives it the credibility, since it is free from any conflict of interest and largely is impartial. Lastly, I want to tell you that as an initiative, along with Rudra, we are trying to do SDG mapping of the schemes that are there in the country, some of the government programs, because ultimately, we all are moving towards the 2030 agenda. So we have already done 1 or 2 schemes specifically for the handicraft sector. We intend to do that for other sectors, and in fact, I was, through UNFSS, wanted to engage other platforms to take up this initiative, which is quite scientific. It is a matrix-based system, so that they could also show their compliance towards the movement towards SDGs. So this is briefly that we do in India. Rest when the questions come.
Thank you very much, Manish. Research, policy advice, the mapping exercises, great example. Development of schemes, so it's a broad spectrum you cover. Before I hand over the microphone to Lucien, I wanted to remind everyone that there is the Slido option, and we would like to bring in questions quite early in the discussion, so please feel free to start posting questions so that in the next round we can take them up already.
Yeah. In the past 2 years, CES has carried out 3 aspects of work. First, we conduct related investigations to achieve a better understanding of the industry demand and the current situation of VSS in China and the international trade influence. CES conduct investigation through the workshop, networking, and the bilateral meeting, and then we built a website on VSS to improve people's awareness of VSS. The website is bilingual in both Chinese and English. Through cooperation with ITC, professional website, sustainable map improve the standing of VSS among domestic stakeholders in China. And third, we publicize the role of the VSS through participating in domestic and international VSS-related activities, communicating with enterprises, and the certifications and so on to introduce the concept of VSS and the positive role in achieving to US SDGs. That's all. Yeah. But I want to, in this opportunity, to introduce a case about cotton. Yesterday, my brother colleague remained the case of BCI. Yes. Now I want. BCI, yes. And now I like to tell the story of BCI in China. The cotton industry is huge. China is an important cotton producing area. However, the cotton industry faces many problems, such as the interests of the smallholders, pesticides, water resources, and soil conservation, and so on. BCI as a gold NGO puts toward a series of solutions, including developing VSS, carrying out certification, and traceability management. In this case, VSS become useful tool to promote achievement of UN SDGs. Meanwhile, improvement to farmers is also observed. According to BSI's statistic, from 2016 to 2017, Chinese farmers, compared with other non-BCI certified farmers, save 10% water per hand, reduce pesticide by 4%, reduce the use of fertilizer by 1%, increase yard production by 14%, and increase profits by 27%. However, we also find that the technical training carried out by BCI is still limited. Many farmers and SMEs in China are lack of this kind of information, so their cotton can't meet the requests of VSS. It seems cause market access limitation. At this time, it is necessary for the national platform to play an active role to promote its information and facilitate the market access for SMEs. So that's a story of BCI in China. Yeah, thank you.
Muito obrigado, Lucy, pelo exemplo e pela história. Eu acho que é importante a gente ouvir alguns relatos parecidos. E voltando à pergunta do Wolf.
We'll go back to Wolf and the questions about the main impacts on the activity of the platform. I think I may mention two kinds of impacts. There is a very important impact that is associated to avoiding waste of resources, and I'll try to explain what it means to avoid waste of resources. And there is also a difficulty related to the work of the platform that is important to be shared, that is the difficulty related to communication. We have to explain day by day what are the goals, what it means to avoid this kind of waste of resources, what is the work of the platform. Because we always say that it's not the promotion of any kind of scheme. The platform doesn't promote and also wouldn't want to need schemes, because there are other communication actions associated to the discussion of the quality and compliance that are not certification. And the producer having a good product at first would be able to go on his own and follow the standards. And from that on, if the product is acknowledged in terms of quality, they don't need the certification. This cost would encompass all the demands, the requirements. So the platform, when developing information programs or studies, in fact, is trying to give to all those involved in the discussion of productive change the existing possibilities. But in real life, this is what we have some volunteers. This is how it works, and there are programs to avoid the waste of resources, and I'll explain that. But anyway, there are programs that are created, designed to that, but they don't comply with the goals that are provided to guide the producer and to reach the consumer. And these programs, then, are terrible to all the interested parties. And we have many examples of this kind of program in Brazil, and probably in other countries as well. So as far as we say, don't have a program with a lot of local specificities, because the goal of this program is also to show the local specificities, but in such a way that your partners, your commercial partners, understand them. So they need to be compatible with the other existing ones, so that the programs can communicate among themselves. So that you communicate something and that this message is received by your client, your commercial partner, in an understandable way. So that's why it's important to discuss acknowledgement and how to do that if the programs are so different, so varied, and with so many conceptions, so how to communicate the conceptions and the importance of them. So this is our daily work, to avoid this kind of waste, because as a developing countries with a lot of specificities, whenever we waste an opportunity on doing something well, it is a waste of financial resources, time, and opportunities. So regarding that, it is important that we know the cases. So a little bit of this is due to the platform. So we invite companies and people who had their own experience related to certification and VSSs, and if they have some positive or negative cases, well successful or not cases, we invite them because they are the basis for us to to create new initiatives or to improve our initiatives. So this is another opportunity that they have. The external experience is important. So I feel great when I tell the case of the Brazilian cotton, and then Liuting mentions her case. She says, we have a similar story. So sharing these cases and experiences is very important. So cooperation, mutual support that this activity brings, and the ideas of the convention is a little bit of that, sharing the good and bad results that we have, so that we can build a different pathway, and that it's fruitful in the sense of communicating the message associated to the goals, and that we don't create unnecessary barriers, and that we look at the discussions of obstructions that we have in WTO. Well, this is real. We live in the real world, so we have to keep that in mind. So this is a little bit of what is the impact, and obviously sometime from now, when we have 15 years of activity, we are starting, and we are quite concerned about the discussion of the impact in terms of numbers. What are the numbers associated? What is the premium value for a product, if there is, and what is the platform? What is the part for the market that we cannot comply if we don't follow the demands, and the discussions about trade regulation? So we have numbers presented, and these numbers will rise, and they will come from a serious work associated to that. But at this first moment, that would be it. I mean, stimulating the big impact and avoiding waste of scarce resources and stimulating participation, cooperation, and making this effort to communicate correctly this message that information, knowledge are very important. And in this area of certification and sustainability, it's mandatory.
Thank you very much.
Muito obrigado, Rogério.
Before we open the floor also for your questions, I would also like to ask one, but for maybe a specific or concrete example where you think the platform can make a difference, where it can have an impact in the future that justifies the further investment in the setup of it.
Thank you. Of the many areas that I've already mentioned, I've cited two. I would like to cite two where I feel that these areas are actually an indication that voluntary sustainability standards will also support. At the SABS, we have an initiative where we are identifying SMMEs and we put them under a project where we are assisting them with certification process. So it's not just certification. We first take them through testing. Say, for instance, there's a product the SME has produced. So we assist them in terms of testing. And then after that, if there's a certification needed for that product, then it goes to that level. So we have co-joined with other SMME government initiatives to actually support them so that we actually subsidize them in the cost of testing and certification. One company that I would like to cite, it's Portia M. This lady actually produces skin products from a fruit in South Africa. It's actually found in the northern part of South Africa. It's called amarula. And I'm sure most of you know the wine, the amarula wine. So yeah, it's made from that fruit. It's actually good on African skin, but I believe it's also good on other skins as well, because I think we do have other people elsewhere who can use our products. So what has happened now with Portia M, her products now are found in supermarkets, leading supermarkets in South Africa. Due to the program that she entered with the SABS, we have actually assisted her to be there. And the initiative or the whole goal is to ensure that she also trade internationally. So unfortunately, I have not got stats now whether she has already entered the international trade market. Another example maybe I can give is that prior to my departure from South Africa to Brazil, we received a request from the industry requesting us to develop a national standard that will stipulate measurement criteria for industry in terms of assisting them meeting the SDGs. So currently that request is being circulated to the relevant stakeholders who are looking into environmental management. So they will be the ones to vote and support that. So this is one of the initiatives that we feel it's actually going to assist in terms of meeting sustainability standards. I have mentioned that in South Africa we haven't yet started the platform, but there are quite a number of examples that I can give to show that we are also gearing towards the same objectives, towards the same goals. Thank you.
Thank you very much. I don't know who's responsible for changing the screen. If there are questions from the audience, I think we have like 50 minutes left between us and the lunch break, and it started. I think we should devote some time also to take up your ideas and questions. Not all of them have a direct addressee. So as I see it now, so maybe we can take up the most liked questions. Oh, I see there's eight likes for all of the 3 of them from anonymous proposals. So since there is no direct addressee, I think they go to, you can pick up those which you find most speaking to you in this context. So, and the first one is on the, since VSS is outside the purview of WTO, how willing is your government in supporting your voluntary initiatives on private standards? What's in it for the government? That's the first question here. On the same level, on the same, and what is the role of the United Nations? We are here in a joint endeavor with the United Nations Forum for Sustainability Standards. What support does it provide to you in a day-to-day functions or in coordinating work between the national platforms? This is also one question that was on my agenda. So where does the power of cooperation lay between the platforms? So what is possible, maybe also on the future perspective, how to develop into to make use of the strength that comes from a set of countries and also from a set of platforms jointly moving somewhere. And the third question I can take up here, you all belong to developing countries. Is your government open to linking trade and sustainable development? More a general question, because it could be against the country's position at WTO. I think we start in the same order, and Manish, you had little time now to prepare, but you can pick one of them and just feel free to address those which you would like to talk about.
Okay, so I think so the first question is actually aimed at India. So yes, the government is not linking trade and sustainable development as in case of India. As India, we are clear that sustainable development is something that we are already engaged in, and it is not warranted to be connected in terms of certification and things like that. Having said that, if you talk about markets, VSS or PSS is a reality. You see the grapes example from India. If you don't have a global gap certification, the retailers in the Europe are shut. It depends upon which side of the table you are. If you are a farmer doing a grapes vineyards and things like that, and if you have the wherewithal, and sometimes the platforms would want to support that activity, why not? So it is a balance that we need to strike at the national platform level, where we need to understand and appreciate the market requirements, and mostly it is done by tackling the scheme owners in a sense where we can play a role of facilitator, understand the scheme, understand the clauses and the requirements that they put there. If need be, talk to the scheme owners and try to interpret it in a manner which is useful for the farmers in that particular area, and then help them to develop trade. So this is what we do.
Do you have any thoughts on the United Nations role, or is this something we can also do this in a second round?
Yeah, of course. The thought is of the United Nations to have a national platform, and I think so. I understand that the United Nations sees voluntary standards as a tool for global trade. That is their thing, but they also have given the countries, the freedom to tackle this particular issue as they deem fit. So each country has evolved based on their national priorities and the national outlook in terms of trade, sustainable development, certification, and things like that. If the audience have heard, the India platform is the Indian national platform on private sustainability standards. So we in India have a very specific understanding about what a private sustainability standard is and what a voluntary sustainable standard is. For us, any standard which has a multi-stakeholder strong composition during the formulation of standard, which also involves part of the governmental system in a sense which I talk about as national or voluntary or PSUs. So we then term that as a voluntary sustainable standard, but when it comes from a very pure private stakeholder engagement, to name a few which all you are, for example, the FSC, PFC, Global Gap. So, there is a distinction that we draw. And as a platform, our focus is to, try to see that the private sustainability standards are being addressed in a right sense among the stakeholders. And if I talk about the government and the voluntary sustainable standards, we are asking the government to take cognizance of the voluntary sustainable standard. For example, in some, the government is a co-scheme owner. And in that case, we are trying to tell the government to make it as a part of the public procurement so that the quality and other aspects are in general appreciated by the government. And government is always a very large procurer. So if the government starts to build in that requirements into their procurement policy, we see that the quality is coming up. So this is what is the thought from the India platform.
Thank you very much, Manish. Yusin.
Yes, I want to talk about WTO. Yes, the VSS is outside of WTO. So several years ago, my colleague he did a lot of research. He wanted to submit a proposal to open discuss in WTO TBT, but it's not success. So I think as a government agency, we can do a lot of things. So we can take some necessary measures to guide the VSS developing bodies along the code of good practice for the preparation, adoption, and application of standards of WTO TBT agreement. Yeah, thank you.
Bem, obrigado aqui pela pergunta.
Thank you for your questions. I think it's another opportunity to clarify our work at the platform. I don't understand the example of the platform regarding the NVS. That's the question. So let's begin at the end. So the perspective that we have regarding NVS and all the shareholders, imagine if the certificator, if he's receiving a lot of demands for the certification, he's really satisfied. If the shareholder is the consumer, he wants to receive what that certification says it's going to deliver, promises to deliver. So these are two associated views. Under the point of view of the Academy, to evaluate what is the impact of that certification to the many shareholders, so it's a good work. The government and the platform, they want to take a look at that environment to see how they're working and if there is necessary some kind of intervention to improve communication, to improve the access to the market. So that's the work of that platform, is to enable that communication space between the many shareholders, trying to avoid, obviously, that the stronger shareholders overweight or the other parts on that relationship. So that's the main work of the platform, to promote that discussion, coordinating that work from many players that are legitimate players. We are not talking about the certification work or the academy. So we need to create this discussion. That's the role that we understand. That's the role that we understand is the role of the platform, and to supply a lot of information. Like I said, our website where we are showing studies, where we post studies. We show studies from other countries, cooperative works. We try to develop projects. That's all on our website, and we hope that this makes a difference and that is going to have a huge impact in the improvement of the environment, the regulatory environment. And we want also to propose alternatives. On the biodiversity panel from yesterday, they said something from abroad that it was an alternative that's different from a certification. So I think that when we are discussing sustainable development and we're talking about a few questions, but sometimes governments, they have a position in an organization or a different body, they have a position that's different from what we do, but in the real world, what companies and where we live, those discussions are facts. They have economical impacts, they impact jobs, they impact consumer relationships, they impact the environment. So as citizens, we have an interest to promote that debate, that dialogue, and the platform is right there to do exactly that. And the convention, this convention, is a result of that platform. Rogério, você quer falar sobre mais algo?
Or the collaboration among platforms, is there something you have to add or you have in mind?
Então, tendo a oportunidade.
Since I have the opportunity to say this, the Brazilian platform has the interest that as one of the results of this work right here, this convention here, we want as an outcome of this convention, we want a declaration of a collaborative work, of a supportive work for the future between all these platforms. This is our greatest interest. This is the interest of the Brazilian platform. We want to work along with all the platforms from India, China, from UNFSS, from South Africa, from our colleagues here. We want all of you to think of a stronger collaboration activity for the next few years. Thank you for the opportunity. Muito obrigado, Rogério.
There was also one question that disappeared. If you want, you can address it in parallel or in addition. That was directly directed to you regarding the future plans for the platform, maybe concrete steps. But of course, same questions also what we had before regarding WTO, developing. What was the other questions again? On the international cooperation amongst platforms.
Muito obrigado.
Really good question, the one that has been directly posed to me, because that's one of the questions I ask myself. How are we going to do this in South Africa, especially that we have a different mandate? We have been established by an act of government with a mandate to develop national standards. Now, the request or the collaboration that we have to do now is to partner in the development of, maybe, should I say, private standards, and which might seem it's a little bit outside of our scope of work. However, as I've mentioned before, that we have been in different platforms where these engagements have been happening, and we have been gathering information of how to do it. At the same time, a similar organization is among our midst. China was able to do that. It's a Standard Association of China. They are in the same position as us. So from there, I can say we will also learn from them how they've done it, which will actually ease our process as well. But at the same time, I also realize, or I have mentioned before, that the objectives of, because the VSS standards are from ITC, and they have a mandate to facilitate trade and to support SMMEs, which is also our objective as an institution. With that in mind, I believe that it will be easier for us to actually partner together or have a mutual agreement to allow us to start a platform in South Africa. Furthermore, there have been an engagement. There's, should I say, a workshop that is currently planned in South Africa to look into bioeconomy with the stakeholders on the platform. So that has also assisted us in a way to already identify stakeholders that are relevant in this platform. We have already engaged with our Ministry of Trade, as I've mentioned. We are an SOE to them. So there is a positive buy-in from them. So we are quite confident that it will be an easier process for us to actually start that process. And both UNFS and DII are there to actually support us and to guide us through the process. Yesterday, I think not yesterday, it was on Sunday, our first meeting we had. I actually proposed that there can be some twinning agreements between a country that has not yet started the process with a country that has started the process to learn as they go through and to assist in developing the platform. So I'm quite optimistic that we will be able to do so successfully.
Thank you very much. We are very close to the lunch break already. I wonder whether anyone is aware of the BRICS dimension. Is there someone who wants to say something about it?
Sobre a questão do BRICS, uma pergunta.
About the issue of BRICS, the question from Andrea, I think this is just a coincidence. Actually, the platforms are involving also two important countries, which is Mexico and Indonesia. So I think there's not a guideline and there's no orientation from the government, but we look at each other, we see each other. And I remember then when we had this good news that India was developed the platform and China was developing that platform, that's when we thought it was a good idea because we should interact. These great economies should interact. Because we looked at each other and we decided to replicate good practices. And Thorsten asked if the Metro has some kind of relationship with the business. How does InMetro promote uptake of standards with business? I think it's so interesting because InMetro has a regulatory work which is very important. InMetro shares methodology, develops meteorological assessments and technical regulations. So this involves this discussion of technical standards and technical regulations. This is really linked with technical barriers. And InMetro has all these features as a Brazilian accreditator. And we always ask ourselves, why InMetro that does not have the competence to act and the standards area is involved with this VSS issues. So this is a question because the VSS have an influence on economy since InMetro is the main manager of our system here in Brazil and standards here in Brazil.
So I always try to repeat this answer and emphasize that we have the system and it gives us and gives to InMetro the condition of the important intercommunicator. We can work in the coordination, but there is no discussion on the promotion. So aside from the regulatory competence that Inmetro has, and me looking to my colleague, I'm looking at my colleague in the accreditation area, Mauricio, and the accreditation that Inmetro does with our institutions, and this discussion on prevention in the organization is not present. It's not our job to promote the system, but on the other hand, as we have a classical work in all this discussion involving quality and infrastructure, obviously we have a compliance seal, and this is the term we use for Inmetro brand. This is compliance with the technical regulation. So there is this acknowledgement of the consumer on that. So a lot of our work in the platform is to explain that there is no assessment or promotion of a practice aside from the regulatory discussion. So that's it. But it's obvious that everything is interlinked, and demanding clarification and improvement in communication, it's important to receive this kind of feedback so that we also have our improvement work in our communication. So thank you for the question. Muito bom.
Continue after lunch. I take the opportunity now to, when closing this panel at the moment, to briefly say what's the role of an initiative like the Managing Global Governance Network, since this is still here addressed. And I can actually take up what Rogerio said first on the national platforms about your job, your task to provide a communication space, right? And the MGG network also is about a platform, being a platform providing communication space. And amongst the platforms, this kind of communication space is something MGG can work on and help facilitate. Of course, and at the same time, this reminds of what Manish said, all the countries have different perspectives, different experiences, and also partly different interests, but the replication of good practices. And this is actually something what we can take from this exchange, and this is what the Managing Global Governance Network tries to facilitate if possible. And you mentioned also Mexico and Indonesia are part of this initiative too, so it goes beyond the BRICS part, definitely anyway in the framework of UNFSS, it goes far beyond that. We learned a lot about the setup of the platforms, of their work, the tasks. We learned about concrete examples and the impact. We also took up some questions from you regarding the development, international cooperation, and for the specific mandates. I would like to thank, first of all, the panelists, because you made really an effort, long way to travel here, very long way. China, it's now midnight already. I just looked it up. So thank you very much for this long way. Thank you for the panelists, and thank you for your good questions. We will reconvene after lunch, and I hope we can also further discussions, of course, over the lunch break. Thank you very much.
Gente, o almoço vai ser servido ali.
Lunch will be served there, and we are a little bit late now, but I ask you to try and come back at 2:10, and I invite our panelists for the photo here. 1:10, I'm sorry. Coming back from lunch at 1:10.